Hey everyone. For today's review, this one's going to be on a different kind of movie. I've watched the usual kind of films that you expect someone like me to watch. I reviewed a big budget drama. I reviewed a big sci-fi movie, an animated movie, and two superhero films. For today's review, I'm doing a silly comedy because I always will love silly comedies. They're not always perfect, but they're fun to watch, and I will always enjoy doing them. So yes, today I am going to be talking about the most recent silly comedy I went to go see. One based around a old fun comedy classic from the 80s. That being The Naked Gun. Back in the 80s, there were all these parody films, and believe me, parody was such a fun genre for its time. It died down around the 2000s when we got films like Disaster Movie. But for the 80s and 70s, it was fun. We got so many great ones. We got Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Monty Python, Airplane, and yes, The Naked Gun. This was a movie based around the short-lived TV series called Police Squad that the creators of Airplane made. After Airplane was such a hit and many still consider it one of the best comedies of all time, including me, it was decided to make Police Squad, a show that included Leslie Nielsen as the comedic man he is. The show wasn't long. It didn't last long, and I haven't really seen it, but it did eventually grow into becoming a movie called The Naked Gun. A movie that I love. I always enjoy watching. It's hilarious. It's fun. It's silly. It's still one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, I think. It definitely is worth a watch if you're a comedy lover like me. The second film, yeah, it got some sequels. The second one wasn't as funny, but still was good enough. I will admit, the jokes in it still did work nicely. It still had that fun comic energy to it, and it was still worthwhile. The third film, I'll admit I didn't really care for. I mean, it had to try, but at the same time, I just couldn't get into it. I didn't think the third one worked well. But anyway, after that, the 90s and 2000s when parody films started to decrease. Movies got less fun. Not many people loved them. Films like, Disaster Movie, they definitely proved that parody wasn't working anymore. And thus, we seem to watch a huge decline in that area of comedy films, and I'm sad because, I feel like good parodies should still be made. They just can't because we have so many sensitive things or whatever to talk about. But thus, this year we saw The Naked Gun come back, and I remember when I first heard about that, I was not happy. When I first heard that we were getting another Naked Gun movie this year, I was not happy. I thought, really? We're making a reboot of this? Why? Come on, leave it alone. We don't want to see this butchered with this new kind of comedy that no one likes. But then, as it went on, I actually did start to grow a bit more interest to it. Later on, I found out that there's a fun cast to it. Instead of Leslie Nielsen, we have Liam Neeson, who was mainly casted because the names sound alike, and it's funny because he definitely was also going for the serious role but being silly at the same time, and I'll admit that did sound like fun. I also learned that it wasn't really going to be a remake, but rather a legacy sequel where it's about his son or whatever. And granted, I still thought that was kind of stupid. It was still interesting enough, at least better than just remaking the whole movie alone. And then I found out that none of the original creators of the first movie were coming back, but the ones that were coming back did look interesting. We have Seth Macfarlane, who of course was the creator of Family Guy as a producer, and Akiva Schaffer, the man who was a part of the Lonely Island SNL band from all those fun songs I don't feel uncomfortable saying the name of, but they're hilarious and stupid. He directed the movie. And those are some funny names, so that could work. And then the trailers came out, and I must say, I got more hyped for it. I gotta say, the comedy in the trailers actually worked. It had similar vibes to what I loved about the original film, and definitely gave me more hope to it. And thus, once the film finally came out, I knew that there were some benefits and drawbacks to when I was ready to see this movie. Benefits being that, again, it had a fun cast and crew to it. The jokes in the trailer were pretty funny, and there was the chance that this movie could finally revisualize good parody films and give us a new light for new good comedy films to come out in the future. As for drawbacks, however, it was a legacy comedy sequel, and those have not been very good recently for many. We've gotten tons of legacy sequels to comedies that really didn't work. It also, again, didn't have any of the original cast members, which was kind of a red flag, kind of making it hard to consider it a Naked Gun movie. And with the chance of this movie not being funny, it could just butcher the original's comedy a lot and end up being more PC and not the kind of comedy we love about the original. So yeah, I when the finally came out, I decided to go ahead and let the benefits work and go see the movie. And what did I think? Was it hilarious or was it not? Let's explain. Now, let's talk about the genres. Of course, it's a comedy film, so I will have to talk a lot about its comedy. But before that, let's focus on the other two genres it represents, action and crime. They're both, of course, not supposed to be presented seriously, but they're still there, and I might as well explain how they played out. I obviously was not going into this movie expected to be amazed by how awesome it is, but I was still expecting them to work fine enough with the action. And dare I say it actually was, I was impressed with how it was. It had that fun kind of energy that not only made it feel less modern and big budget like most action films. It gave it a little edge, you know. I like that this movie did that with the action. It didn't try to make it as big budget or exciting as other big movies. Because, you know, a lot of times when a comedy movie wants to have action, they'll try to make it look as epic and exciting as other big films. Like, you want action in your comedy movie? Try to compare it to the Avengers or something. Get to that route. But thankfully, I'm glad that this movie didn't do that. It instead made the action work, but also not try to be as too epic or exciting as most superhero films or whatever. It kept it at a minimum to where it's fun, but not trying too hard to be as fun. Not trying to take over too much. Just there for when there needs to be action. I like how they didn't waste too much money on effects or whatever. We didn't have too much CGI in it. Now, there of course was some CGI. I mean, it wasn't a lot. I'm thankful that it wasn't. I'm thankful that there was more practical to it and didn't have to waste too much money on a movie that isn't even supposed to be taken seriously. They didn't waste it on CGI or whatever. They just made sure the action was there when we needed it. You know, we didn't. And I'm glad this movie did that. I really love that the movie actually made the action unique and not too epic or taken over to the film, you know, not too distracting is what I mean. It's at that right pace that fits with the rest of the movie. You know, it's not trying to be too big budgety like I'm saying. It's just simple. That's what I like, simple action, you know. Action in a movie that's not trying too hard when you know your movie's supposed to not be a full-on action film. Now, the crime story will tie in for when I talk about the story of this movie, but for the crime story itself, how unique is it compared to the other Naked Gun films? I'm not going to compare it to other crime movies in general, just how the other three were. It is a new one, okay? I'll explain the story later, but I will say I do like that this crime story is new. Now, new compared to, again, other crime movies in general, maybe I could be wrong, but there's too many to choose from. So just compared to what the crime stories in the other three movies were, this is a new story. It's a new kind of adventure, you know, one with new twists. I'm glad it doesn't try to re-visualize everything from the other movies. It's a new kind of story. I mean, yeah, you could argue there are some elements to it that are similar, but that's how crimes are, you know? Not all crimes have to be 100% unique. They just have to be a new thing, a new sort of incident to deal with. And that's what we get in this movie, a new crime for our main character to deal with. I'll explain it when we get to the story part, but for now, I'll just say that the movie does have a pretty good crime story that's unique compared to the other films, and again, it doesn't distract too much from the story. We take it seriously when there's serious moments, and we enjoy how silly it is when the movie wants to be silly. And now that ties into the comedy of the film. How does it work? Did this movie make me laugh out loud? Yes and no. What do I mean by that? Well, let's first talk about how this movie's comedy works in terms of who made this film. Because like I said, none of the original creators made this. David Zucker, Jerry Zucker, Jim Abrams, the trio for Airplane and Police Squad, they were not involved with this movie. Like I said, the main crew behind this was producer Seth Macfarlane and director Akiva Schaffer. And with those two in mind, you would think that meant that the movie's comedy would have sort of a similar vibe to SNL or Family Guy, you know, since those are the two creators. You would think that with them involved, most of the comedy would consist of random famous people showing up or cutaway gags. But, funny enough, these two did a pretty good job at making the comedy stay focused and faithful to how the comedy in the other three movies were. I'm really impressed that they were able to make the jokes in this movie had the same feel to it as the previous movies. You would argue that it'd be hard to do because we have such a sensitive vibe and we don't want to see comedies like that. But I really think they need to realize that we do. I really think that Seth MacFarlane has to be one of those people that knows that we want this old kind of comedy. We don't want comedy to be more subjective and less political. We want it to have a good offense to it. We don't want it to be safe. We want it to be as hard as it can go. And I really hope more people will think that. And I'm glad to see that there are still those that can. So yeah, I'm glad this movie was able to make the comedy work in the same manner as the other movies, being silly puns, ridiculous stupidity, and just random background sight gags. Because that's the kind of comedy I love. That's what made the Naked Gun movies so funny. Sight gags and stupidity in the characters. And you get to see that in this movie. True, that is sort of what Family Guy or SNL had as well, but the fact that they were able to make it work and feel like a Naked Gun movie instead of a Saturday Night Live sketch or a cutaway gag is quite frankly pretty impressive. Now, the other thing I want to focus on is a big issue a lot of legacy sequels for comedies have: recycling jokes. Yeah, movies like a lot of the streaming sequels we've gotten recently, like Happy Gilmore 2, for example. You saw me rate that as a 5 out of 10 for being not terrible, but it didn't work as well. And I guess that more so had to do with the fact that they were mostly recycling what we remember from the other movies. There were new jokes, but for the most part, it was just telling us what happened in the first movie. Like, hey, remember this funny bit from the first movie? Yeah, it was doing that. And there are a lot of legacy comedy sequels that do that. This movie doesn't do it, actually. Or at least not to a big extent. There are minor story elements that feel similar to the first movie, but in terms of its jokes, it's new ones. New jokes for the franchise, new kind of humor that we don't remember from the first, or at least don't remember as entirely. They're not jokes that we only can laugh at because we know that they're from the first movie. They're new jokes. That's what we want. We want new humor, not humor that only makes us laugh because we remember it from the previous film. Jokes that are original jokes. And this movie has them. Most of the time. Yeah. At the same time, however, there are still jokes out there that are similar. But not for The Naked Gun, per se. For just other famous comedies in general. There were a couple of jokes in this movie that were basically similar to other comedy films. For example, there's this hilarious scene where Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson, yeah, she's in this movie too, they're just chilling at their apartment and doing things like cleaning up this oven or hanging out with the dog, and this guy is watching them through a mic but can only see so very because they shut the window, so he has to try and see it through his visual lens for what he can see, and with the background it looks like they're doing dirty stuff, like he's cleaning like this, and then again he sees it and it looks like he's we haven't seen that joke in a Naked Gun movie, but we have seen that in other films like Austin Powers, for example. Austin Powers had that joke. And yeah, when I watched, I did laugh a lot. But at the same time, I knew that it was an Austin Powers joke. So, and there are other jokes in this movie that work in that manner. So, even though thankfully you won't be seeing jokes that you only know because you've remembered the first movie all the time, you will see jokes that you do remember from other silly comedies. But to this movie's credit, I actually was able to laugh at them for their own manner. Like I said, that's the only way a comedy joke works, when you laugh because of how it is on its own. You laugh for what it is there. If you laugh at the joke only because you know that's something that you saw from the first movie, then it doesn't work. It only works when you laugh to it because it's a new twist to it. So I think that's what makes them work this time. While you could argue some jokes are recycled, at least you're able to laugh to them for when they're used here. You're not laughing to them because you know that they're jokes that you saw in that other movie. You're not like, I remember that. I saw that movie. I know humor. You're laughing because they're jokes there. So, granted, this movie actually I was amazed with it. It actually gave us unique jokes that maybe were recycled sometimes, but I could laugh to for its own manner. I didn't have to know what they originally come from for that. Maybe once or twice they had that, but that's a world record for legacy comedies nowadays. All these streaming comedy sequels we've gotten, they're trying so hard to do that stuff. I'm glad this movie didn't do that. I'm glad it gave us a sense of comedy that Wasn't perfect, maybe was overused a little too much, I guess. Maybe they could have toned down sometimes, but was still able to work in its unique way. So, thank you, Naked Gun. You gave me humor that I can actually enjoy liking. All right, I was focused on the story. It's not supposed to be the main focus. Again, I should have maybe saved comedy for a while since that was the film's focus, and that's what I'm going for. But let's just go with the story. What was the story on this time? In this movie, we're focused on the police squad business going out of business, shutting down because of Frank Jr.'s actions. Yeah, Jr. Like I said, he's the son of Frank, and there's a scene where he's trying to make word with his father. It's a fun scene. You saw it in the trailer, right? There are a lot of people who apparently have who descend from the characters of the first movie, and then there's that OJ joke. Yeah, in the movie it worked great, so keep that in mind. Anyway, it's focused on police squad being forced to shut down because Frank has bad actions, but he learns about a new organization he has to take down involving a tech business that wants to create this sort of weird power thing called plot device. That's what it's called, so that's the tone. That apparently turns everyone into literal animals. Yeah, it's not entirely explained what his huge motive is. He does sort of analyze why he thinks this is going to work for him, why this is good, but again, it's just because he's evil. So Frank has to stop him and also prove he's worthy and not evil like he is. He also has to deal with the loss of his wife as he meets a new chick who's played by an old Pamela Anderson. Spoiler alert, she's not as hot as she was in the 2000s, so any of you Pam fans who remember her for that, I'm sorry. She's not going to be like that, but she is still in the movie. And with all due respect, she's not that bad of an actress. Granted, she's not top tier actress. She's not Scarlett Johansson levels of great acting, but for this movie, I think she still works fine as a good actor. Sure. And Leslie Nielsen, Liam Neeson, you see, that's why they cast him, because of the great, I got mixed up. Liam Neeson does a pretty great job in this movie, too, because like I said, not only is it funny because of his name, but he has the same kind of mannerisms that Leslie had. Leslie's best taste in comedy was that he was able to say all sorts of stupid, silly, funny things in a serious tone. He could be like, I have tiny nipples. Yeah, or you can say it in a very serious manner. And Liam Neeson does that too. We've seen him do that in other comedies. Like, he's collaborated with Seth Macfarlane before a couple of times. He had this hilarious cameo in Ted 2, and, and it was him being a serious man, but we laughed because of what he said. So that's what he's like in this movie. He says a bunch of stupid stuff, but it's funny because he says it in a serious tone. Like, really, that's really good to know because that's what Leslie was like. So it's good that they were able to make it work with Liam Neeson having that same name, but also the same kind of mannerism that he can work into a comedy. I think I remember hearing that he was going to retire from acting, but apparently not. Now he's in the Naked Gun sequel, and his acting still works pretty well. The story proceeds, and let me just say this right now. There are tiny elements in the pacing of the story that you could argue are similar to the first movie. The opening of the movie, for example, opens with Liam Neeson in a disguise going into a big crime scene. He then peels his disguise, starts beating the crap out of everybody, and then calls himself Frank Drebin. That's exactly what happens in the first movie. Granted, it's a different take, different location, different scenario, whatever, but it's the same kind of pacing. Now, one thing this movie does not do that I kind of hated was the opening. The opening of the other three movies, if you remember, was a police car driving through random crap. This movie doesn't open with that. Instead, it opens with a action title card that is also used hilariously, which I guess you can give credit for, but man, I would have loved to see the cars opening again, because that had so many fun elements to it, just driving through random crap. I would have loved to see a new take on that. We don't get that, unfortunately. The best we get is at the end credits where they use it, but they only reuse it. They don't add new bits. They just reuse the car openings from the other films. So I'll admit that was a little disappointing, but it didn't bother me too much. As the story proceeds, it's silly joke, then we get a serious moment. It goes back and forth on that. And I argue that was a good thing for a comedy lover, but also a bad thing for a movie lover. For someone who loves comedy, it's good. It's good to get a laugh in a movie theater and not just be sitting and quiet. It's good to have an audience that you can laugh with. However, one thing that made most parody movies in the 2000s not work was them trying too hard to tell too many jokes. And I think the reason those parody movies didn't work is because while there were funny jokes, story wise it couldn't work because they relied too much on how much humor they can tell, and not care about how the story progresses. I know we're here to laugh, but we also got to know what the story is because there could be those who really want to get invested in what the story is like. So if you're not doing that, if you're just making a movie to throw in jokes every 10 seconds, it can be problematic for most viewers. Now, granted, I will forgive this movie for having most of the jokes be funny ones and still making sure the story progresses as a new one. But I do think it's best maybe not to have jokes every single 10 seconds or whatever. Maybe pace them more. Sometimes there's joke after joke. I feel like every joke should be pasted separately, you know? We have joke, joke, joke. That's what it is. At least do that. But having joke, 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 I just feel like that maybe if they kept doing that, it would become a problem. So if we're gonna get more comedies like this, I want to make sure that they go with that manner of having one joke at a time and not rushing too many at once. Because that's what made most parody films in the 2000s not work, because that's what they did. Or at least that's just what not made them work in my eyes. Anyway, the ending of this movie also has a similar vibe to the first one. The climax of the first movie involved them at a baseball stadium where you have to stop everyone from the outrageous fighting, and at the end they all hug and make it up. And that's exactly what happens in this film. Instead of a baseball stadium, however, it's a boxing arena with some famous stars I don't know of because I don't watch boxing. All I know is that Mike Tyson is better than Jake Paul. I'm sorry, I had to bring that up. Anyway, in this scene is sort of different. You know, there's a difference. Say it's not the same kind of plot or whatever, but it does have that bit of everyone fighting, and then at the end they all hug it out. So yeah, you could argue that might be bothering if you really hate when movies do that, but you know, it didn't bother me too much. It only bothered me a little bit because I was trying to look for entirely new story. I was trying my hardest to make sure they were avoiding going for that route of reusing elements, like I mentioned earlier. But still, I guess I can be grateful that that's all it was reused, and it wasn't reused 100%. Still, though, it would have hurt to maybe make it a little unique. Maybe not have it at a sports stadium at least. I'm just saying. I'm hoping maybe a part of me hopes that it was just coincidence and they weren't purposely reusing all those elements in the first movie, because a part of me is thinking that could have just been a coincidence. It did feel sort of like it was trying to go for its own route, but at the same time, maybe it wasn't. Maybe they were just doing what the first movie did. Well, no, I don't want to think about too much because that's minor. It's a minor detail. This movie overall is a 7 out of 10 for being not as funny as the first Naked Gun and not one of the best comedies of all time, but still really hilarious. But here's the question. Is this movie really a Lord and Savior to parody? Is this movie a blessing for comedy films? Yes. Yes, you thought I was going to analyze why it isn't, but no. I actually got to admit, it is. This movie actually might be our Lord and Savior for spoof films. Honestly, that is, of course, if this movie was able to become a huge success, which so far it could. I mean, there were a lot of people at the movie theater, which was great, and I saw a lot of promotions at the theater, so that's good to know. So maybe this movie will be a hit. It should be. And if it is, this could be a new sign that we'll finally get to see the love of the enjoyment and excitement of hilarious comedy that was missed, that we've not been able to see. This decade, we've seen some good comedies, but for the most part, it's mostly just films relying on trying to be epic and fun. This one relies on being silly and fun, and I want more of those. I think with this movie proved to me that we can still get those. We can still get silly and fun movies that don't focus on being safe, focus on just being as funny as they can be. So with this movie, dare I say it, it might actually be a Lord and Savior for the spoofs. And I'm hearing news that there are a lot more legacy sequels coming out for spoofs. Granted, I do want to see more original silly films, but the amount of classic parodies you wouldn't expect to see again today coming back for a sequel is impressive. Spaceballs, a movie I didn't really like, but still, it's a classic parody that everyone else loves. That's getting a sequel with Mel Brooks returning. Scary Movie, which has its ups and downs. It's returning with the Wayne brothers who made the first two movies that were hits. They're returning for another one, so that's great to know. And even for this year, we're getting a sequel to Spinal Tap, a comedy that my dad loves. I think is good, but still a good example of classic parodies. And with it returning and pretty much all the cast members coming back, I say that's a good sign. Maybe these legacy sequels shouldn't always happen, but maybe with legacy sequels like this showing off how silly comedy can be done, maybe with these examples, they will start to give us more original silly comedy films that we loved from the 80s, 90s, and so on. The kind that make us laugh, don't try to rely too much on not caring about what kind of jokes they're telling. Just go creative with the jokes, rely on, have a focus on what they are. Jokes that are creative, jokes that are, unique, jokes that usually aren't something you would catch first viewing, but are able to catch in other viewings. Jokes that test us, not jokes that are obvious or like anybody can get. Jokes that test people, give people a sign of you either get it and are able to laugh, or you don't get it, and it has to take time until and when you do get it, you find it amazing. That's the kind of comedy we need more of. And that's the kind of comedy I really think this movie is finally going to set up for us. And I hope I don't prove myself wrong in the future and we end up getting another downgrading comedy. But I see there are some good signs, because like I said, we're getting a lot more of these legacy sequels to classic parody films, and they could hopefully be a sign that the world of silly comedy that we loved in the 80s and 90s could make a comeback. I know I don't want to eat my words, but with the way this movie turned out, I think there might be hope in the world of comedy.